2,000 Indians in Iraq is no mean number. They're living there. Add to that the impact that the ensuing oil crisis will have on India. But more than that is a growing threat from a group that we knew very little about less than a month ago, the ISIS. Considering the reports that the ISIS poses a direct and not an indirect threat to India, makes matters even more grave. Good evening, I'm Mahrukh Inayat, you're watching To The Point, and the big debate at 8:30 on To The Point is what does the ISIS mean for India? We're decoding this organization, this extreme terror group that some are saying is far worse than the Al-Qaeda. But before we go to our debate, as the hostage crisis in Iraq has entered the day 12, the appeals for an urgent rescue operation are getting more and more desperate. The latest is an SOS call from a group of Indians stranded in Iraq. Even as the Ministry of External Affairs is making daily press briefings, assuring all is well, every minute is precious for those in captivity. Every minute is an oppressing burden for the families back home.
Fear writ large on their faces, desperately flashing cards of their employment agencies in Delhi. These are our countrymen trapped in the Iraqi city of Karan, sending out an SOS to the Indian government to mount a speedy rescue. Back home in Himachal Pradesh's Una, the silence at Sunny's home is broken by the sound of his video message streaming live on the laptop.
और जैसे कि लड़के ने वीडियो फिल्म में बताया कि उग्रवादी उनके बिल्कुल नज़दीक आ रहे हैं, तो मेरे लड़के ने भी यही आपसे गुजारिश की है इंडिया गवर्नमेंट से कि जितनी जल्दी हो सके हमें यहाँ से इराक से निकालो.
There are some lucky enough to have escaped from the war-torn country. The horror still mirrored in their eyes. Appeals for stranded fellow countrymen on their lips.
बड़े-बड़े बम डिगदे आवाज़ ਤਾਂ बहुत किलोमीटर तक आउंदी आ. उस कान दे ਚੱਕਰ 'ਚ ਬੰਦੇ ਸਾਰੀ ਰਾਤ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਾਗ ਕੇ ਕੱਟੀ ਦੀ ਆ.
Our efforts are continuing both in Iraq and outside. Our initiatives are gaining impetus. We are proceeding systematically and carefully. Various doors are opening now.
On a high after their success in Syria, ISIS guerrillas are on a rampage, capturing Iraq cities, key oil fields and refineries. More Sunni fighters are pushing into Baghdad from their newly seized strongholds along the Syrian border. It is oil that is keeping the jihadist machine up and running. Oil powers their vehicles, their arm chest, helping in expanding network. Experts say Iraqi Kurds are close to creating an oil state of their own. The Iraqi government blames the Saudi Arabia for bankrolling ISIS.
वो सिर्फ सख्ती को जानते हैं, दूसरी कोई ज़बान उनके पास नहीं आती. हमने इससे पहले भी कहा है कि they are supported by Saudi government. That's the fact. तो सऊदी गवर्नमेंट को दबाना चाहिए कि वो हमारे नागरिकों को वहाँ से निकलवाए.
The threat is clearly not just confined to Iraq anymore, but the entire Middle East. Escaping from the clutches of ISIS jihad needs a well-thought-out strategy. Bureau Report, headlines today.
What is the world dominion plan that this extremist terror group has? How does India feature in this plan? What about the hardened Indian who are already working for the ISIS that will return home one day? To answer all these questions, joining me on the debate tonight, we will have Dr. Wael Awad in a bit joining us from London, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, former Indian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman and the UAE is joining us from Dubai this evening. Siddharth Vardarajan, senior journalist from here in Delhi. Ambassador R.S. Kala, former Indian ambassador, is also joining us from New Delhi. And Imran, who just returned from Iraq, in fact from Kurdistan, earlier today is joining us from Ahmedabad. I want to start with you, Imran. When was it that you realized that your life was in danger? What was the first indication that came through?
Ma'am, zone first.
Okay, we'll go to Imran in just a bit. We're having some some problem with the connection there is what my producers are telling me. But let me start with Ambassador Kala. Ambassador Kala, with your experience in Iraq, you would have a better understanding of how the ISIS operates, what its workings are, and some of the chilling plans that we are hearing at this point, that India seems to be part of their global plan. How worried really should India be at this point?
Actually, you see, the ISIS is an amalgamation of various, what should I say, organizations. Some are jihadi in nature, but some are fairly secular. For example, the former Saddam loyalists who have also seemed to have joined in. The problem is that this is not a situation where you have government versus what do you call an organization or a jihadi organization. This is very much a sectarian kind of situation, a sectarian warfare, if I may say so. So therefore, as far as India is concerned, our policy always has been twofold. One is to ensure the safety and security of our personnel who have been working in Iraq in various areas. And second is to see that the unimpeded flow of oil takes place from Iraq, because we are net importers of Iraqi oil, particularly from the southern Iraqi area, which is around Basra. So therefore, our policy always has been to encourage the Iraqi government to have an all-inclusive setup as far as Baghdad is concerned. But at the same time, we have been also urging them to have an internal sort of situation where they can have peace amongst the three major communities of Iraq.
Okay, stay on with us, Ambassador. Imran is back with us. Remember, for our viewers who are joining us at this point, he just returned from Iraq earlier today, from Kurdistan, from the one part that has been the target of the ISIS. Imran, you were telling us, when did you first realize that your life was in danger?
On 6 June, 6 June I realized, and with me there was one another Indian. His name was Muhammad Altaf. He is from Mehsana. He is also from Gujarat, and there are 10 more Punjabis was working with me. And we was so scared when the first.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
When the first.
Go ahead, Imran. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. And when the first attack was in Mosul, we all was so scared about that all. And after that, 40 Indians has been kidnapped there. For ISI has been kidnapped the 40 Indians. And after that, there was one my friend from Punjab. His name is Stephen, and his uncle also adopted. So I also talked with him, and I asked him that what's the matter there and what's going on there. Then they told me that they are not, the ISI was not doing any harassment with us. Just they are demanding that you call your boss here, and he will give you your salary, 3 months salary, and then we will leave you.
Okay, and now that you're back home, would you want to go back to Iraq at some point?
No, I don't want to go Iraq back anymore.
You don't want to go back to Iraq. I want to welcome Dr. Wael Awad, who's also joining us from London at this point. And Dr. Awad, we're talking about the ISIS, and like Ambassador Kala mentioned, that there are some secular groups within this organization, but the Iraqi ambassador to the US seems to suggest that this is far more severe. It's like unleashing 1,000 Obamas. Is he exaggerating the threat of this group?
No, not exactly, because you remember when the crisis started in Iraq after the invasion of the United States, there was dissolving of the army, the security forces, and then they had joined hand with the majority Shia against Saddam Hussein. But when the American invasion took place and they stayed for 10 years in Iraq, they were basically supporting the militia groups in Iraq, which called al-Sahwat, which called the former Ba'athist parties, and the former Iraqi soldiers were supported by in the Sunni area by the American, and after which they left, they immediately gave this area literally to the Sunni hardcore organization, who joined hands, 15 of them joined with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and they moved into Syria. So 2011 saw in Syria the nourishment of ISIS, which was already taking place there with funding from Saudi and Qatar, with smuggling through a Turkish border with Syria, 850 kilometers, and all the guns and weapons came from Libya, and after which they have strengthened their hand and they start going back into Iraq and declaring Iraq and Syria as part of the Islamic State, which they have declared. And I think this is the dual kind of, what we say is the dealing with the issues. On one hand, they were supporting them in Syria. Now they are defending or opposing them in Iraq. It's exactly showing that the West and the United States, who nourish this group, they are responsible at the first hand of unleashing this part of the this type of terrorist group inside Syria and Iraq, where they have terrorized, where they are killing people, and the West is closing their eyes on the and they're not even showing their atrocities, except for the 2,000 Iraqi soldiers who were massacred in Mosul, and then after which they have showed to the paraded on cameras to show the fear among the public opinion on those respective countries that the danger now is against their national interest.
Okay.
But for the last 3 years, they were not saying that the danger was causing any harm to them. Now they're saying because of their mercenaries from their own countries are taking part in along with them. There are more than 50 nationalities, in fact, including Pakistani, Shishans, Afghan, Libyan, Britishers. Everybody now are taking part among this jihadist group.
So it's not just restricted to the Middle East. This is becoming a global threat. And Siddharth Varadarajan, I'd like to bring you in at this point, because some experts seem to suggest that there are several Indians, alleged Indian jihadis, who are also working with the ISIS, and one day they will return home. And then they will be supporting the ISIS cause from within India. Is that too far out in the future, a possibility to consider?
Well, I haven't seen any credible reports, quite frankly, which confirm the presence of Indians among the ISIS, and I would be surprised because in the 12 or 13 years since 9/11, there's been hardly any instance of an Indian being involved with the Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda affiliated extremist or terrorist groups. So I think let's take all these reports with a pinch of salt. For now, as the name of the group itself suggests, the ISIS is focused on Iraq and Syria and the Levant region, which perhaps includes Lebanon. And that doesn't minimize the danger that they hold for the region and ultimately for South Asia. Because the kind of approach towards Islam that the ISIS has, which is a complete negation of the manner in which Islam has evolved, the idea of treating Shias as apostates in some way, all of this is a recipe for disaster for the region and for the wider region, for India, Pakistan, our entire region. And this is where the danger comes. That if in Iraq you have an escalation of Shia-Sunni confrontation, if Shia shrines get targeted, and that can of worms gets opened up, that's where I think there would always be the danger of inflaming public opinion. But I don't seriously think too much about the ISIS or individuals with the ISIS posing a direct threat to the geography of India. It's a different matter that Indian nationals who are in Iraq may have been captured by them, and they need to be, the government of India needs to work to bring them back home. But I think that this is where it's the region of the Levant that their primary threat is, and that's where we need to focus.
Okay, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, at this point, in terms of the relations that India has seen with Iraq, we've seen that traditionally, even during Saddam Hussein's tyrannical rule, the relationship between the two countries was very robust. At this point, the BJP government is saying there is no need to press the panic button. Do you agree with that point of view? Do you think our strategy should be stronger, rather than just, just look at how the situation develops?
Let us have a sense of proportion. A small number of our community have got into the war zone. They are stranded in a war zone. We have no evidence that any one of them has been mistreated. We have no evidence that there is any direct or immediate threat to them. Of course, they are in a bad situation, and it is our effort to get them back as quickly as possible. I also would like to suggest what Varadarajan has just said. Let us not get all het up about a direct threat to India. There is no direct threat to India. There is a concern about what has been happening in West Asia for some time. It is a direct result of certain policies that some of the regional players and big powers have been using religion for the furtherance of their interests for some time. And they are living with the consequences of what they had done. For example, when the Americans went into Iraq in 2003, they very clearly had a sectarian agenda. They had a divide and rule policy. When you had the commencement of the civil war in Syria, again the participating countries had a direct sectarian agenda. Now, when you have started this kind of fire, you should be prepared for the fact that one day it will start burning your own home. So it is at the moment confined to West Asia. It's a very serious development. I do not believe that there will be extraordinary upheavals of the kind that will change territories, change borders, etc. I think it can be contained. It will be contained within national borders, but it is a very important lesson to us that we should not get involved for short-term advantage. We should not get involved with stoking fires that we can no longer control after some time.
Okay, Ambassador Kala, you mentioned the economic fallout of this entire crisis. It's already being talked about by the government, by the top industrialists in the country. Do you see that? Do you see this energy crisis, the oil crisis that perhaps might ensue because of this ongoing, almost turning into a war-like situation? Do you think the time has come for India to perhaps have a more compact energy security system, going by what has been happening in Iraq?
Well, you see, if you look at the situation in Iraq, the oil is exported from Iraq mainly from the southern Iraqi areas, which is around Basra. This area is Shiite dominated. And the second area where Iraq has a major production of oil is in the northeast, in the Kurdish areas. Now, both these areas so far are bereft of any kind of security problems or any security situation. And therefore, I don't see how the present situation in Iraq should affect the oil situation. My guess is that the oil traders in New York are taking advantage of the situation to raise the oil prices, because there is no diminution as far as the volume of oil is concerned. And secondly, there is no reason why this situation should not continue, because as far as southern Iraq is concerned, that is fairly normal by Iraqi standards. So therefore, as far as India is concerned, we should be a little bit, what should I say, more look at the situation in a more thorough way rather than simply go by headlines. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the refinery in Baiji, but the problem is, you see, Baiji it refines oil. We don't import refined oil from Iraq. We import crude oil. As far as the refinery in Baiji is concerned, it will have an impact, but it will be a domestic Iraqi impact. It won't impact as far as other countries are concerned. So therefore, I don't see how the situation there should cause such great economic upheavals as far as India is concerned. No doubt we have to be careful, no doubt we have to be watchful, but I think the situation so far doesn't warrant the kind of pessimism that one sees in the Indian media and elsewhere.
Okay, you seem to suggest that there is a pessimism in the media, which perhaps might not be the ground situation at this point. Siddharth Varadarajan, as far as, they say about strategy, it depends on capability as well. Do you think it is lack of capability as far as India is concerned for us to have been able to formulate a far more robust strategy in the Middle East?
Well, there's two things here, right? Robustness depends on what the purpose of policy is, right? Now, I don't think anybody is seriously suggesting that India is in a position to or ought to project military power, for example, in order to evacuate its citizens there. But it is true that the kind of importance that West Asia and Iraq, the Middle East, if you will, deserves in Indian thinking has, there's been some diminution of this region in Indian strategic thinking in the last few years. Even the President's speech a few weeks ago, elaborating the Modi government's priorities, for example, had no mention of West Asia. It spoke of South Asia, Russia, China, Japan, but had no mention of West Asia. So I think India needs to focus on this region. It's highly important strategically, economically. Large number of Indians work here. India has enormous economic interests. And I think that's really where our diplomatic energies, our strategic energies need to be focused. Robustness implies that there is a military game to be played, which there isn't. There is nothing that India can do by projecting military power here. If anything, I would say that the projection of military power by outside players is what has complicated and made the situation much worse. But I think India needs to have a coherent strategy of working with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with the other countries in the region, counseling that they stay off the sectarian divide, as Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed has said. We need to counsel the Americans to be cautious in their approach, and we need to perhaps work more closely with the Russians and Chinese in crafting an alternative approach to the crisis in Syria, for example, where the US, even though it's not militarily involved, is still committed to a policy of regime change, regardless of the kind of disastrous consequences that regime change has had in Iraq or Libya. So I think that this is where Indian diplomacy needs to be more active.
Final question to Dr. Wael Awad. Siddharth Varadarajan mentions Iran and Saudi Arabia, and clearly in what is happening in the Middle East right now, these two countries are cautiously watching each other, warily at that. Where do you see the Indian relationship vis-a-vis Iran emerging as far as this conflict goes and the future of it?
I think if the United States is approaching Iran for security and stability in the region, India is equally important partner because of the geopolitics and the Indian oil security policy that is mainly dependent on the oil from the Gulf state. I think there is a major playground for India and Iran to play a stable role in this part of the world. Because if you look what's happening in Africa, an African policy of the United States is to push out India and China and taking over the oil resources that they have done in Libya, where they handle Libya to the militia, stateless Libya now in the hand of militia. It's easy for them to deal with the oil. In a similar fashion, they are pushing Iraq into the same direction, where you might also find the same problem. Let me add one more worry for India, which is going to be the 2014 evacuation of the American troops from Afghanistan. It may go the Iraqi way. So there is a question of the raising of extremism in the region, which serve the purpose of the visit in this country to see India and China are not stable country in this part of the world. I think India need a more proactive policy to make sure where their interest lies.
All right, Dr. Wael Awad, from London, thank you so much for joining us on the show. The crisis is deepening by the day for Iraq. New Delhi honestly can't do much since the situation on the ground is out of their control at this point. What the Modi government can do, though, is to ensure that the Indians trapped, some of them kidnapped and stuck in Iraq, are evacuated at the earliest. Our experts on the show today said that there isn't as much pessimism on the ground as perhaps the Indian media is reflecting. Thank you so much, Dr. Wael Awad, joining us from London, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed from Dubai, Ambassador Kala from Delhi, Siddharth Varadarajan, and of course Imran, who just came back from Kurdistan. Thank you so much for joining me on the show this evening.